There, everyone. It is still Monday, February the 7th in 2022, and I have a very special guest who is returning now. We have Millennial Mike. So, Mike, if you could, for anyone who has not met you yet, and I think everyone has seen your videos already, but if a newbie who's watching this channel, can you give a brief introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm a 31-year-old police officer who lives in the Seattle, Washington area. And because it's so unbelievably expensive to invest in real estate here, and because it's very anti-landlord, I said to myself, you know what? I probably should look at a different market somewhere else in the country. So over the last few years, I've been making YouTube videos about how I began my investment journey, and then how I eventually moved from buying my first rental in Seattle to then buying out of state in Indiana. That's how I met Mark. Mark introduced me to the Indiana market, and I now have 8 units. And hopefully one day I catch Mark and maybe get somewhere like 25.
Sounds good. Well, let me ask you this then. Since you have 8 units, did you grow up, as I would say, like with a silver spoon in your pocket, rich family? And are you already the police chief making a huge salary?
No. I mean, police officers are paid more in Washington and California than they are in most places in the country. But the cost of living here is extremely expensive. I mean, I think you're actually below the poverty line as a single person. If you make like under $70,000 a year, maybe not poverty line, but like median income or something like that, it's very high cost of living here. So I do have a good salary as a police officer, relative to other salaries in the country, but it's doesn't go very far here when the average cost of a house in Seattle is $900,000. It doesn't go quite as far as you'd like it to. Did I grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth? Well, I tell a very quick and simple version of my childhood, because most of the things that I experienced as a child and the things my mom did for work would get you demonetized, or you're not allowed to say on YouTube. So I grew up very poor, Section 8 housing, food stamps, 6 siblings from 4 different dads. I'm the oldest. We were extremely poor. Evicted multiple times as kids, drugs and other illicit things were in and around our lives. So no, I did not grow up with many benefits other than the most important one, and that's that I was born in America.
I got you. Sounds good. Well, thanks for sharing what you just shared. So, well, moving on then, as you know, and most viewers know, you and I both are investing in Northwest Indiana. More specifically, a lot of our properties are in the city of Gary, Indiana. So let me throw this over to you, Mike. Why do you like the idea of investing in Gary, and what do you think about the city of Gary?
I think when anyone looks at Gary, if they're being honest, the number one thing that comes to their mind about why they would want to invest there is because it's cheap. It's affordable. An average person like myself, who didn't have a ton of real estate or a ton of money, can actually get started buying rentals, one rental at a time, because they're like $80,000, $60,000. It's affordable. Then the number 2 thing that goes through your mind as you start to research Gary is, wow, this place is a run down, depressed city, and do I even want to buy there? So at that point, you then have to really do your research and try to figure out, is it worth investing in a city that I probably wouldn't want to live in just because I can actually afford to do it? I made the decision to do so because I knew you. If I had not known you, followed your story, and seen your success, I would never have invested in Gary, Indiana. But you put me in contact with people like the Olsen Group, property managers who I spoke with, and began to learn that, even though Gary on the surface looks terrible, there's pockets of it. There's ways you can make money. There's good investments. There's opportunities there. And so I just kind of copied your strategy. And I'm happy to say, to this point, I've been pretty successful.
Right. That sounds good, because I agree with that. You have been fairly successful. I've been fairly successful. And one little tidbit here, even though we're talking about Gary, I've been around this country somewhat. You can find cheap houses all over, not on the coastlines, but you can find them in Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Missouri, Kansas, Ohio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Gary is just one city. It has a solid history behind it over the last 100 some years of what has been done in Gary. And just as an example, the king of pop, who's now deceased, Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5, they came from Gary, Indiana.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Gary is an interesting city. There are a lot of cheap houses. Birmingham, Alabama comes to mind, Tulsa, Oklahoma. I know you own some in Birmingham. Literally the reason I chose Gary was because as I was looking at other inexpensive markets, I saw your success and I saw that you were doing well there. And so I was like, okay, if Mark went from 1 to 3 to 5 to 9 rentals, clearly he's doing something well. At the time, I don't even think you'd ever even had an eviction yet. And you still haven't had that many, given how many rentals you have. And my biggest concern was, what are these tenants going to be like? Are they even going to be able to make payments? How hard is it going to be to collect? Do I want to invest? And I saw your success, but ultimately I can't say that it was because I did research and that was what pushed me over the edge. The thing that pushed me over the edge really was you were successful. I trusted you because I'd known you for a while at this point. So then my question to you is, what pushed you over the edge? Because I'm sure you were looking at the same things as me at one point. What made you decide I'll dip my toes in and give Gary a shot?
Well, for myself, in the very beginning, with the very first house I bought in Gary, and it wasn't actually in Gary, it was in Lake Station, just outside of Gary. That was the first property. And when I closed on that, I had not been there yet. But within a month or two, I visited the area and I had a chance to kind of drive around Gary a bit. And I saw how rough it was. I saw places where it's like, wow, if I stop my car and it's dark out and I get out of my car for whatever reason, I might not be able to get back in my car. It's just kind of dangerous. Yeah. But the more I looked at it, when I realized, hey, Amazon has a new distribution center there and they employ, I don't know, say around 1,000 people. And they have expanded since they first got there. Then I heard Hard Rock Casino was coming in and they're now opened up. Then I heard FedEx and UPS had expanded operations. Then I was told that Amazon, well, the city of Gary has an airport that has a longer runway than the longest runway at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And I was told that Amazon was looking at that airport just to see if they could use their big giant airplanes to take off and land there so they could have a larger distribution center and carry more packages out. Then I heard a tech company that was going to be the only tech company that would make 5G phones and maybe computers or tablets in the United States was looking at Gary. But now that tech company, from my understanding, they've pulled out. They're not, or it fell through for some reason, whatever that reason is, it fell through. But that kind of tells me that if Hard Rock found Gary, Amazon found Gary, other UPS, FedEx are expanding, without knowing for a fact, I can say without a doubt that I believe other companies are probably looking at Gary. And they may have representatives that will drive around the city and maybe they'll see one of Mike's houses or one of my houses and they'll be like, hey, somebody is fixing this neighborhood up. And as they fix it up, I see maybe somebody walking out the front door that's wearing like good clothing because they're going to a good job. And maybe that will encourage maybe a Chick-fil-A or maybe a Target or whatever this business might be to break ground in that city, because at the moment, a big company like that can get cheap property. Mm-hmm. So anyway,
I think you're right. I think companies are going to look at it as an opportunity cost. Living in Seattle, a lot of companies here and in Washington are tired of the politics, very tired of the taxes, tired of what I would think is just an ungrateful voting population. I mean, a company like Boeing, major airplane manufacturer that has 80,000 jobs in one single plant and then has 4 or 5 plants around the area, their engineers go on strike, and the next year's the mechanics go on strike, and the next year someone else goes on strike. And they, that's why Boeing moved some of its plants to South Carolina. They're like, we're done. We're going to manufacture planes somewhere else, somewhere where we can get cheaper, affordable labor, better tax advantages, better tax breaks. A couple of years ago, Amazon was trying desperately to get out of Seattle. Seattle wanted to impose this tax. It was extremely controversial at the time. I don't know if it ever made national headlines. They wanted a headcount tax. Every employee you have, $500 of tax. It was like a month or something. Well, Amazon employs 45,000 people in the city of Seattle. Each month it's going to be millions and millions of dollars. They said, no, we're done. We already pay all these taxes, even though the news media would have you believe they don't. And Amazon picked up, and they were trying to get out of the state, but eventually they ended up just going to Bellevue, which at the very least, it's just across the water from Seattle. But just getting out of the city of Seattle saved them a ton of money. Well, as more and more states, Tesla leaves California, Boeing leaving here, Amazon leaving here, people are going to go to places like Tennessee, Florida, Texas, and I hope possibly someplace like Indiana. Now, a lot of these tech companies may not go there because, they can start up from scratch somewhere else, but hopefully there's a bunch of abandoned industrial plants, manufacturing plants that someone could move into, repurpose or reuse, and ideally get cheap, affordable labor, better taxes, and hopefully improve their business there. That's what that company, Acumen, is the name of the company. It was going to make 5G phones, and it did fall through. But I think Gary is on people's radar. If big companies are looking at it, not every deal is going to fall through or come through. But some of them will, like the Hard Rock Casino, like you said, or Amazon saying, you know what, we can save a lot of money by landing our planes 30 minutes away and driving to Chicago than landing in Illinois and paying all those taxes.
Right. Very, very true. And one thing, I don't know if you and I have talked about this at all before, but Tom Olson one time told me one of his goals, and he told me something to the effect, if you look at Gary, almost every single house in the city was built, say, 1960 and before. They're all older houses. They're solid 2-1s, 3-1s, maybe some 3-2s, maybe a 4-1 or 4-2. But he said the city is missing those new neighborhoods, the 3-2s. And I've toyed with the idea as my portfolio has grown, could I at some point, maybe I start with buying a single lot in the city that has water and sewer there I can hook up to, and could I build a new construction house, just a 3-2, 1,200, 1,400 square feet, and it'd be a new house in some neighborhood. I would pick a decent neighborhood, not one that's run down, but one that's on the upswing.
Yeah.
And if I could be successful with one house, because if I did that, I don't know if I'd rent it or would I just try to flip it and sell it. If I could be successful with one, my bigger goal would be to do it on a block somewhere and then to expand. So, but I don't know. It's just right now it's kind of like a dream up here or a thought. We'll see how it all plays out.
I mean, everything starts out as a thought or a dream. So, it's definitely possible. I do think at the very least, buying one rental at a time, that's one house that's going to be taken care of properly. That's going to be maintained. That's not going to be allowed to just fall into disrepair. That's not going to be allowed to be burnt out. You have 25. I've got 5. Caleb has 17. Will, Zach, all these folks each have houses. And just the more we can buy, with friends like Darius and Evan, who just bought their first ones, or Evan's trying to buy his first one. As more houses come online into our little mastermind dynasty, as you put it the other day, as we bring more and more people into the family, that's more and more houses that are taken care of, maintained, that look better, that look nicer. The city gets their property taxes actually paid. Hopefully they turn around and, do something like get rid of some of the condemned houses that should be condemned. The city of Gary owns hundreds of houses. And they'd released some programs like they were going to try to sell them at very low cost to contractors and flippers to stimulate the economy. And Gary had to be sold to local people. But ultimately, the city of Gary is holding on to a lot of houses that either need to be condemned or sold off to flippers to be fixed. And for whatever reason, they've been dragging their feet on that. And I don't know why.
Right. That's true. And one name we can add to the list here probably in the next month or so is my youngest son. He's 24 years old. And he's going to be buying his first rental house. And we're looking at houses in Gary. And we're trying to decide between which one for him to get. But he's been pre-approved already by our favorite banker, Jerry.
Nice.
So it's just a matter of finding the exact house. And he's on a time crunch because he is in the Coast Guard. And he has a little over a month till his boat deploys. So, but I have faith in Gary and I have faith in my son and everyone else involved that we can find a good house and the deal will get done.
Yeah. I think it's a good spot for people to start. My goal now, I think I want to diversify from Gary a little bit, but not far away. I think I'd buy something in like Hammond, maybe get a few in Hammond that are in slightly nicer areas. So I have some diversity to what I have in terms of a portfolio, if you can call 5 rentals a portfolio. But ultimately, I would say that I think Gary's still my long play. I'd like to get a few in Hammond, then go back to Gary and try to buy up even more because they are very inexpensive. And you could believe it or not, you really could conceivably do things like I'm going to buy this entire city block. and just start with this block and then the next block and then the next block. And if you can bring the city back and make it a good place for people to live in and then commute to Chicago, I think that it really actually has a chance at coming back. That's my opinion.
Right. Sounds good. And one other thing real quick here before we wrap up. Since you have, what did you say, like 5 rentals in Gary, and I have push in Gary and Lake Station. I think I have 19 right now, but I'm looking to add more. But talk a little bit on positive cash flow with your houses there. I've stated many times my goal when I buy a house is to have roughly $250 a month in positive cash flow. From your perspective, are you seeing at least around $250 a month when you buy?
Yeah, I mean, I won't buy a property that cash flows for less than 250. There's properties out there that cash flow for less. Those are what I would consider like an average deal or a below average deal. I'd say a good deal starts at like 250. A great deal is like 300 a month, and that's after all expenses: principal, interest, taxes, insurance, vacancies, maintenance, property manager. If you pull all that out, you're still making 250 a month or more. The nice thing is, we've been able to be the benefit of this ridiculous inflation that's been going on. And so rents, I bought houses that rented at 800 that now rent for 950. Houses I got that were renting for 750. Once that tenant moves out, my property manager is like, we're taking it to 1100. That does amazing things to your bottom line for cash flow. And then you reap those benefits, helps you save up money faster, which will eventually snowball you into being able to buy more rentals quicker, or you can just be done and live on that positive cash flow if you want.
Right. Yep. Very true. And I've had the same thing. I've had, say, with all of my houses I bought, I think cash flow was in that ballpark range of, say, 250 to 300, right around there somewhere. And I started about, I think, three years ago. So in the time since then, that whole inflation and that, as I call it, that forced appreciation on homes, some of my rents now, the positive cash flow is pushing $600 for an individual house. Some are 500, some are 400. But every single property I have bought in Virginia, where I started at, and in Indiana, every single rent has gone up from when I first bought it to present day. And I only started buying, 5 years ago.
Right.
So, but anyway, so before we wrap this up, Mike, because we don't want to get this too long, but do you have any last thoughts on Gary or just on anything at all?
I don't think Gary is for everyone. You have to have a certain level of patience. You have to be able to expect that you're going to have some problems. A lot of inherited tenants that I have inherited have not been as great as I would wish. Tenants that I place, that my property managers place, do a significantly better job. So you have to have patience. If you are, just month to month on your paychecks or just past it, I would avoid Gary because, you can have unexpected costs come up because if we've bought properties from someone who didn't take as good a care of them as we do, and then you get unexpected costs, or the tenants that they placed weren't as good as the ones we would, so now you've got nobody paying, or you have to file an eviction. So Gary is a great place to start. You probably should be active. You should be ready for a challenge. I think it's going to reward you in the long term. But if you're the type of person who wants to just buy something, look the other way, never think about it ever again, let your property manager handle it and let the money come in, then that's what you're probably going to have to pay a premium for and go to a nicer market or a nicer city. But yeah, that would be my advice.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that, because that's one thing I didn't say. Even though my cash flow has improved quite a bit for my homes, I have spent a pretty penny in fixing things that should have been fixed years ago, and then fixing things that just happened to break. And just in a nutshell, I've put roofs on, I've replaced sewer lines, furnaces, windows, doors, flooring, so on and so on. So I agree with what you're saying. If you want to invest in Gary, it is not for everyone. Everyone needs to do their due diligence. And everyone, I told my son this just yesterday on the phone. If you buy a house in Gary, my thoughts and recommendation would be probably to have maybe roughly 10K in reserves for all those what ifs, because those what ifs will happen.
Right. Agreed. Don't skimp on your vacancies and maintenance percentage that you're setting aside, and don't kid yourself into thinking you won't necessarily need it. Like, it needs to be there. You probably will need it. Don't set yourself up for failure.
Yep. That's very true. All right. Well, good enough. So unless you have another word, we'll send this one out.
I'm good, sir. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, audience, for watching. And if you haven't not done so yet, check out Millennial Mike on YouTube, and I will put a link to his channel in the description. So for Mike and myself, we thank you for watching, and Mazske Finance will be signing out.